Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about travel healthcare housing costs and whether we think that travel therapy or travel healthcare in general is worth it right now with increasing housing costs as well as just general inflation that we've been seeing for the past probably year or so. So Whitney's going to introduce us and then we'll jump into the topic.
All right, hey guys, for those that may not know us, my name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazazza.
And we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We've been travel PTs for almost 7 years now. And we've been the faces behind the Travel Therapy Mentor page for over 5 years now, bringing you guys lots of information and education about travel healthcare. We try to do these videos about every other week on Facebook Live, and then we upload them later to our podcast so that you guys can learn about various topics as they relate to the travel healthcare industry. So we try to bring you new and pertinent topics. A lot of times we'll go over some of the older topics to rehash those. But lately we've had a lot of more timely topics with everything that's just happening with the new year, with the changes that have happened in the industry because of COVID. We try to do travel therapy job market updates that pertain to how the staffing industry is changing because of the changes in COVID and other factors. And this is a really timely topic that has come up a lot lately. We've had a lot of people asking questions about whether now's a good time to travel because of COVID, because of housing prices, and just in general, they want to know if it's like still good to travel right now. So we want to talk about some of those things today. As Jared is getting our video shared in a couple of groups, I'd love if you guys would say hello if you're watching live. Just leave us a comment and say hi. Say that you're watching live. Say if you're a PT, an OT, an SLP, a nurse, or what discipline you are. Let us know if you're a current traveler or if you're somebody who's thinking about traveling in the future. And we'd also love to know if you're a student who's thinking about traveling as a new graduate. Let us know in the comments. Also, while Jared is sharing our video and we're getting going here, I do have a couple of announcements. So we are getting ready to leave on a trip. A lot of you guys that keep up with us on social media know that we don't work full-time anymore as PTs. We usually work about 3 months or less per year in the clinic, and we spend a lot of time working on our online business, Travel Therapy Mentor. But we also spend a lot of time traveling in the country and then out of the country too, just for fun. And now that we work online a lot, we can take our jobs with us, so we can work remotely. So we're getting ready to go on about a 2.5-month trip. The first stop of our trip is going to be in San Antonio, Texas. We're going to the biggest physical therapy conference each year, the APTA Combined Sections Meeting, otherwise known as the APTA CSM Conference. So we're super excited. We'd love to know if you guys that are PTs or PTAs or student PTs or PTAs, if you're going to be at CSM, let us know. We're actually going to be hosting a social meetup for those that are current travelers as well as thinking about getting into travel therapy or travel PT more specifically. We're hosting a meetup at CSM. It's going to be this coming Friday. So we can give you some details about that if you guys are interested, if you are going to be at CSM. We look forward to seeing you there. And then from Texas, we are going to head to Mexico for about a week. And then we're going to try to go to a couple places in Central America. We don't have the full itinerary planned out just yet, but we'll be updating you guys on our social media as we go. For some of you guys that have been following us for a long time, you might know that we had a whole 5-month trip planned to Central and South America in 2020 that we ended up having to cancel. And ever since then, we've been trying to make it back down there to go to some of those countries we didn't get to go to. But we're a little bit wary of booking things so far in advance because we basically got screwed over back in 2020. So we're kind of taking it a week or two at a time. So stay tuned. If you're not already, follow us on Instagram at Travel Therapy Mentor. That's where I post all of our travel pictures so you guys can follow along with our travels through Mexico and Central and South America.
Yeah, and hopefully the video quality is a little better tonight. Whitney just got a new phone after a couple years, so we're recording it on that phone, and it's exciting. She's been really excited to take pictures with this new phone.
Yeah, I got the iPhone 13 Pro. It has way too many cameras on the back. Not as many as the Pro Max, I don't think. And I think some of the other like Android phones have way more cameras than this even. But the camera quality is getting super good on these phones. We're really excited. It'll be really good for our trip so I can take lots of cool pictures. So hey, thank you guys who are leaving comments if you're watching live. Also, if you're watching later on the replay, feel free to type #replay. Let us know you watched. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Zamina. Hey, Millie. Hey, Thomas. Hi, Alexis. Hi, Kaisa. Hi, Logan. Hi, Carly. Hi, Alicia. Hi, Becky. Lots of you guys on tonight. Haley, Diana, Joey, Gary, Nick. What's up, Nick? We're going to see you at CSM. Cheryl, Diana. Hey, guys. Thank you for joining tonight. All right, well, let's get into talking about tonight's topic, and let us know if you have any questions as we go through.
Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, we'll go through those at the end. So housing costs have gone up significantly. We've seen this on Whitney's last contract in Hawaii. Housing was really difficult to find, and it was very expensive compared to what it used to be. Housing, even in our area, which we're in a pretty rural area, our hometown right now.
Well, suburban, I would say, not rural.
It's fairly rural, more like suburbs, and housing costs are up here a lot, both like house purchase prices, but also rent prices, and especially short-term rent prices. So we're seeing that pretty much all over the country. And a lot of travelers or people that are interested in travel have been contacting us and saying, I see that you're saying pay is high, but also housing is really high, and it's hard to find right now. Am I going to be able to find housing that's affordable as a traveler? Do you think it's worth it? So we wanted to come on here and give our little bit more nuanced opinion on this, as well as what we think might be in store in the future or could be in store, so that in the future when we get this question, we can direct people to this video and instead of typing out a long answer each time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we polled some people on our social media, and pretty much all of them said that they've seen rises in housing costs, short-term housing costs for their sorry, I can't talk tonight, for their recent job searches. And then I asked them a follow-up question. I said, did you think that it's still worth it to you to travel? And undoubtedly, all of them said they still thought it was worth it, which we're going to go into more details about why. A lot of them said they still thought it was worth it financially, but especially a lot of them still thought it was worth it just for the overall experience. They were like, I'm not completely just only in it for the finances. I still think it's definitely worth it for the experience of meeting new people, trying out new settings, exploring the country, avoiding burnout, all those wonderful things that travel therapy can bring. So people definitely felt that it was absolutely still worth it for them. And then a lot of people also noted that they were seeing higher pay packages, which were offsetting the higher costs. So that's some part of what we're going to talk about when we get into talking about the financial part of the equation.
Yeah, that's really the main thing, is that as housing prices have increased over this last year or so, especially short-term housing, so have pay packages. We've seen it almost in lockstep going up. Part of that has to do with just general inflation, but part of it is like disconnected, but they just happen to be increasing at the same time. So I think a lot of it is correlation, not causation. But yeah, we've seen the highest pay rates we've ever seen in the last decade. We've been traveling for 7 years. Pay rates are much higher than they've ever been. But also housing prices also increasing much more than they were before, short-term housing in particular, but also people's permanent tax home. Their costs are going up there. So people renting a room in a house or renting an apartment back home or buying a new house at their tax home location, they're paying a lot more money for that housing as well. So this kind of hits travelers additionally hard because we have short-term housing at an assignment and also our tax home costs back home. If both of those are going up in addition to things like utilities, food costs, and all that, it can really impact us a lot.
Yeah, there were actually already some travelers that were reaching out to us prior to these increase in housing costs that really didn't even see it being financially feasible for them with having to duplicate expenses. And we're going to get into talking about looking at your own situation, your own expenses at home, ways you can keep expenses lower at your travel assignment to decide if it really is going to be financially feasible for you. And of course, there's a lot of people who look at like their permanent job. If they're already earning towards the top of their profession at their permanent job, for some of them, it's not a huge change to get into travel therapy. They're like, all these people are talking so much about how it's so much more lucrative. For some people, it may not be. There are certain people out there that are earning really high. Maybe they're working overtime or an extra PRN job, and they're like, I already make this much, and then the travel pay and gain quota is this much. So there's no blanket answer across the board. It's definitely going to depend on you and your situation, and we'll talk about some of those factors you can take a look at.
Not only is every person's situation different, but also every contract is different. And if you guys have been watching our videos for a while, you know that in some areas, like our hometown, for example, there's a couple travel jobs open around here. One is paying probably $400 or $500 a week less than the other one. It's not because the company's paying less, it's because the facility is paying less for that job. So someone in the exact same situation might move to our hometown to take a travel job and think, oh, wow, I'm not really getting paid that much here. Housing's kind of expensive. It's not really worth it. Whereas if they had taken that other job making $500 a week more, then they wouldn't feel that way. So every contract's different. Every person's situation is different. You have to take those factors into account before you ever accept a contract. And one thing we want to talk about here is that you always need to check the housing prices in an area before you ever accept a contract. Make sure there's affordable housing, at least affordable for your situation, before you ever accept a contract, because once you accept it, you're kind of stuck. And if there's, say you go to Hawaii and there's no open housing there for less than $3,000 a month, then you might not be making that much money as a traveler. So take those things into account.
Yeah, so let's break down some of the factors that are going to affect kind of that cost-benefit equation. So the one thing that a lot of people always look at is just where can I make the most money? And we've always been advocates to look at when you're choosing travel therapy contracts, not only where you can make the highest pay package, but where you can also find reasonable housing and cost of living for the area that you're moving to. For example, it's really common for a lot of people to say, you're going to make the most money in California, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area. You could make $2,000, $3,000 plus as a traveler there. But what they often don't look at is for certain people, the housing is going to be so expensive in those areas. The people that are really able to bank a lot of their money and their income in the San Francisco Bay Area are the single travelers who are willing to rent a room in a house. Sometimes they're still able to come out really ahead when they take into account their paycheck versus their rent. But for a lot of people that want to have their own place, at least a 1-bedroom, if not a 2-bedroom, you're going to spend an exorbitant amount of money in a place like San Francisco, and it could really offset the amount that you're making weekly. So we've always encouraged travelers to not only look at the paycheck that you could make on a travel job, but take into consideration the cost of living in the area.
As a traveler, my motto has always been, don't look at the pay package, look at how much you can save. So it's not how much you can make on a contract, it's how much you can save on a contract. So that takes into account the cost of living aspect, not just the pay package. Because yeah, like Whitney said, a lot of people will get sucked into taking these high paying jobs in really expensive areas, and then they don't end up very far ahead financially like they think they will just based on the pay package. Whereas if you can take jobs in more like moderate cost of living areas that are still paying pretty high, but not as high as some of the high cost of living areas, a lot of times you come out ahead financially that way. You save a lot more money there.
For example, we've been travelers for about 7 years. We worked full-time back-to-back contracts for the first 3 years, and since then we've been taking more like part-time, not working year-round, but back when we were working year-round, we took every single one of our contracts on the East Coast. It wasn't exactly how we planned it in the beginning. It just sort of ended up that way. We had planned on moving across the country, but we just kept finding good opportunities that kept happening back-to-back. When we were working, this was between 2015 to 2018 when we were working full-time year-round. We only ever made the highest contract we ever took was $1,850 a week. So we typically were making somewhere between $1,550 to $1,850 a week. And just on that, which that's a lot of money, but for some people that are only looking at the 1,800, 2,000 plus contracts that there are now, that may not sound like a lot of money. But what we did is we were in lower cost of living areas. And so even with making those more moderate pay packages, our expenses were so low, and we were able to reach, Jared reached complete financial independence in just a 3-year full-time working career. And I'm, close to financial independence and definitely what we like to call semi-retired now. I don't work full-time anymore, just because we were really smart with that cost or that expense to income ratio. Yeah,
I saw Nick said that San Antonio housing, he's taking an assignment there right now, has increased, but not too bad. So any current travelers in here, let us know what you've seen with the housing market, not only at your assignment location, but also at your tax home. Have there been any changes? And if so, how much?
Yep. So just to give you guys that example, obviously our situation is going to be different than your situation, but we were able to come out ahead very lucratively and come out ahead very well financially by taking these contracts in lower cost of living areas, even though the pay packages only looked moderate. So it can definitely be done. So that's one thing to take a look at is how much is the pay package paying and what's the cost of living in the area. Now, Jared mentioned you might want to take a look at the housing before you ever accept a contract. Now, you may not always be able to secure housing before you accept the contract because typically they'll submit you. You might have the interview within 48 hours and then they wouldn't answer within another 48 hours. You may not be able to line up housing in 4 days from finding out about the location, but what you can do is start running a few searches and just see what's out there.
Yeah, this is easier than ever with things like Airbnb and Furnish Finder. You can, if a job pops up in a certain area, just go on those websites, see what's available for the time you might need, just to get a general idea. Before you ever even interview for a job, that's what we always did back when we would take consistent contracts. Part of that was in our camper, so we would check out campground costs before we ever even interviewed for a job. But if we weren't in the camper, we would also just check like Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Airbnb, and Furnish Finder just to get an idea of what the costs are going to be like in that area. And to decide if it's too expensive compared to the pay package, we'll just move on to something else.
Yep. So the first factor is how much is the contract paying? The second factor is how much is the rent going to be at the location where you're going to take the travel assignment? The third factor you need to take into account when looking at your finances and considering if travel therapy is going to work for you is how much are your expenses back at home?
Yeah, this is a big thing because we have had the majority of travelers, I would say, are young, right? So probably of our audience, probably 80 to 90% are somewhere between 26 and 35, like somewhere in that range. And so because those people are young, a lot of times they don't have a lot of roots set down anywhere, and they kind of got out of school, decided to travel. You don't have a lot of fixed costs back home. You rent a room and it's pretty cheap to do that. Whereas we do talk to people every now and then that say they got married in grad school, or they had a kid in grad school, or they're a little older, further along in their career, and they want to travel and they already have a mortgage back home. That's a vastly different situation, because if you have a mortgage, say that's $2,000 a month back home, versus someone that's renting a room in a house in their hometown for $400 a month, those are very different costs, and that can really sway whether travel makes sense for you or not.
Absolutely. So this comes down to looking at your personal situation and how much are your current expenses? How much are you currently making at your regular job? Or say if you're a newer graduate, and what are the permanent jobs that you're looking at the option? And how much more can you make, and how much of that will be able to save as a travel healthcare provider? So for those of you that might have your own mortgage, it's definitely possible if you own a home. We have heard people that are later in their careers that maybe they're empty nesters and maybe they're actually in a position to consider selling their home. That's a life choice that they want to make at that time. We have heard people say, I'm just going to sell my house, I'm going to get an RV, or I'm just going to become a nomad for a little while and do this travel therapy thing. That will definitely put you in a better situation financially, but we're not saying you have to sell your house. We actually own a house and we still take travel contracts. So we happen to have a really low fixed expenses at home. We live in a low cost of living area. We don't have a huge house with huge expenses every month. So depending on your situation, maybe your house is almost paid off, or maybe your mortgage is pretty low. For other people that may have a higher mortgage or higher expenses, there's other things you can do to offset those expenses. For example, you might consider renting out part of your house, like having a short or a long-term tenant rent out a room in your house to offset some of your own expenses back home.
Yep. So rent it out either part of the year, or you can rent out if you say you're renting, or say you have a 2-bedroom house and you could rent that on Airbnb for the full year while you're out on contract. While you're not there, if you have a property manager in the area that can take care of it for you, that can really offset some of your costs. So there's ways to offset some of those tax home costs back home. You just have to make sure that you understand the tax laws and that you're staying in compliance in terms of your tax home, and not just renting out the whole thing while you're gone and pretending like that's your tax home. Obviously, that's not allowed.
Yeah, and somewhere in between there, between the person who doesn't have any roots at all and the person who has a home where they have a big mortgage and a lot of expenses, we've also spoken to people that have an apartment that they're considering, should I continue renting this apartment, or should I let my lease go and get a different dwelling to keep as my tax home? So definitely, if you're in a position to change your rental situation to something cheaper, if you don't plan to be there much throughout the year, definitely take that in consideration. Either consider renting a smaller place or getting rid of your rental and seeing if you have a friend or a family member who you can rent space in their house if you don't plan to be there much over the next couple of years while you do travel therapy. So these are all some strategies you can use to reduce your fixed housing costs at home. Of course, there's tons of other budgeting things we could talk about to reduce your overall expenses, utilities, your cable, your phone bill, your car. So some people might have like a really high car payment. Maybe it might be in a situation where you want to switch to a lower car payment or get rid of a car payment and buy a used car. So there's definitely some ways that you could look at your expenses, that you have your fixed expenses, and how that's going to affect your bottom line.
Yeah, in general though, I think pretty much all the travelers that we polled and we talked to, and ourselves included, we still think right now is a great time to travel. Pay rates have increased more than housing has increased. So pay rates are up, I would say on average compared to prior to COVID, probably $200 or $300 a week. And during COVID, they're up probably $500 to $600 a week. So if you're considering housing being maybe $200 or $300 more a month, or maybe a little bit more than that, then that's more than offset by the increased pay that we're getting right now as travelers. Now, where this gets a little uncertain is what the future is going to be like, because what we know right now is that the travel market is really being boosted by there being a limited number of therapists for basically quite a few open jobs right now. So the supply and demand dynamics are in our favor, but we know all throughout COVID, for at least that first 6 to 9 months when COVID started, that was not in our favor at all, and pay rates were really low. So what could happen in the future, we don't know what the future is going to hold, but what could happen is that pay rates start to decline for travelers while costs for housing still stay high. And that could be a future scenario, maybe a year from now. Pay rates go back to where they were before COVID. Housing costs stay high. They're unlikely to come back down. Honestly, like wages and housing, when those things increase, they usually don't decrease back. So if that happens, there might be a situation in the future where travel doesn't make as much sense to certain areas. And that's going to be the more high cost living areas if the pay packages don't fit for the cost there. So right now, I don't think that's the case, but there could be a situation in the future where that could be the case.
Right. So definitely something to keep an eye on. But right now, as Jared said, just to reiterate, we definitely still think it's a very good time to travel. We absolutely think it's going to be lucrative for you. From what we heard from most travelers who are actively searching for contracts and housing right now in January 2022, they say that they're at least breaking even the same as they were last year, if not coming out way ahead financially because they're seeing way higher pay packages. So there's just a lot of things that you're going to need to take into account for your own situation when you're starting to look for these jobs around the country. Just don't be starstruck or dazzled by all the highest pay packages without taking into account the cost of living. And then, of course, you need to take a look at your own situation in terms of what your housing is back home and also what you're willing to do as far as your housing where you're going. For example, we had one person reach out to us who was laying out their scenario. We actually talked through their exact scenario of what they were making back home and what their expenses were back home versus what the contract was paying and what the housing options were. However, this individual needed a place that was pet friendly, that was larger. They needed at least a 1-bedroom, if not a 2-bedroom, that was pet friendly. And they were running into a lot more problems. And I'm like, yeah, if you're only comparing your situation to the traveler who's willing to rent a room in a house for their tax home and their travel location, doesn't have pets, is a solo person, maybe not traveling with a spouse or whatever, your situation is going to be a lot different. And you may not come out quite as ahead financially, but you can definitely come out ahead. But with that said, there's some other things that you might want to look at. If you know for sure you're not willing to change or not able to change your expenses at home, or you're not willing or able to change the type of housing that you're going to need because of a spouse, a family, a dog. One strategy we've talked to people about who have a spouse, a family, a dog, a cat, is RVing. Some people feel as though they come out ahead more financially having their RV and making it easier finding housing. Because you can just go in your RV and find campgrounds rather than have to rent pet-friendly housing or housing the size to fit your family. Now it's not to say it doesn't come with its own challenges. We've definitely heard from people who are RVing right now that it's actually more competitive to find RV sites than it was back when we traveled in our RV between 2015 and 2018. Kind of everything's just more competitive right now with COVID.
And in terms of those costs for RVs, a lot of people do think you're going to come out way ahead. Some people overestimate how much you can save in an RV because obviously most of you guys know that I'm really into tracking finances and doing a lot of calculations on things, and I calculated that of our 3 years traveling in the camper, we broke even. We didn't save a ton of money in our camper like you would think because of things like depreciation on the camper itself and repairs and taxes and additional gas costs and all these things that factor into that as well. So you have to consider that, but there are definitely people that travel with pets or travel with kids where an RV makes a lot of sense.
Yep. So that's one thing. If you know for sure that you're not willing to budge on your type of dwelling that you're going to live in, maybe look at RVing if that's an option for you. If it's not, and I'm just going to have to pay a lot for housing, it just is what it is, you're going to have to do a little more work on the income side of the equation. You're going to have to negotiate a little harder, work with more companies to compare pay packages, be a little more cutthroat when you're deciding on which contracts you're going to take. You're going to have to seek out those companies that pay a bit higher. And you may have to be a little more flexible on the setting or whatever it might be to get those top dollar contracts. And that was one of the strategies I talked about with that person whose example I was going over, because that person was unable to really change their housing situation. They weren't willing to not travel with the pets and that sort of thing. So I was like, okay, well, here's some tips on how you might be able to negotiate a little higher pay next time. And if you're only talking to one recruiter, it's definitely a really good idea to talk to more than one recruiter to see which ones can pay you top dollar so that the finance side of things really looks better for this person who can't make as big of an impact on their expenses side.
Yes.
And Jared just recently wrote an article we did about negotiating higher pay. That's on our website at traveltherapymentor.com on some different ways that you can try to get higher pay.
Yeah. One other thing to think about too is, not every traveler travels with finance as the primary reason that they're traveling. And we've gotten more like that now that we are in a better financial position, and we don't really need to take the highest paying contracts, and we can go for some more of these like ideal contracts. And that's what Hawaii was. And we're thinking about going to Alaska this summer, and that's the kind of contract we're looking for there too. So depending on your situation, like say you want to take a job in Hawaii jobs don't pay that well, and housing is extremely expensive. But with that being said, you might not come out that far ahead financially, but it's an amazing place to experience for a few months. So that is a huge benefit. And there's a lot of places like that in the country where maybe finances aren't your top priority for that assignment, or maybe other contracts during the year you make up for some of what you're paying in housing at one of these expensive areas, but it's worth it for you for the experience.
Yeah, you definitely want to take into account your priorities. We always mention there's three main factors when looking for travel healthcare contracts. One is location, one is setting, and one is pay. And you have to decide which of those three things is your top priority. And we literally talk to dozens of people every week who are looking to get into travel therapy. And for example, if you go on our website and fill out our recruiter recommendations form, we don't just give everybody the same recommendations for recruiters, because we take a look at every single person's preference. And I read so many different stories. So I get the person who's straight into the point, and they type in their little form, high pay, high pay, high pay. I'm only doing this to get high pay. I'm only doing this to pay off my debts. I get the person who's like, I'm really excited. I'm so excited to travel and see all the different things. And, I don't care what setting I work in, because I want to see so many places. And, pay is important, but honestly, like going to these places is the most important thing to me. And then I get the people that say like outpatient. I can only work outpatient. I don't care where I go. I don't care how much money I make. I will only work an outpatient. So you have to kind of know yourself and know which of those three things is the most important thing to you. And then of course, hopefully you get a really good pick in all three categories. But you just have to know going into travel healthcare what is your main priority, and then go from there with your conversations with recruiters when you're searching for jobs and trying to find the right fit for you.
Yeah, we were more like that type 3, outpatient, only outpatient. That's kind of how we were when we were traveling.
Yeah. So definitely some things to keep in mind in terms of deciding if travel healthcare is right for you. But just to rehash, it's just going to be so different for everybody. We talk to a lot of people online, and we definitely every now and then just get that person who's like, I don't see it. I don't see how travel healthcare is more lucrative, because I make $1 million at my current job, and they're going to be paying me basically to go there, because like they're going to pay me like one half of what I currently make. And I'm like, if you make $8 million already as a PT, like, yeah, don't leave that job. Duh. But there's a lot of people out here who are not making good money at their permanent jobs, and they need to change for various reasons. And there's a ton of people like us who are using travel healthcare to get themselves in a better financial position and pursue financial independence. I mean, I humble brag here. I'm 31 and he's 33, and we don't work full time anymore. Like, travel healthcare was able to make us get there, and it's definitely replicable. You may not be able to put yourself in the exact same situation that we put ourselves in, but you can definitely use this to your advantage depending on what your goals are.
Yeah, and also we're the first to admit that travel is not for everybody, and we've had several people every week that reach out to us and give us their story, what they're looking for, and we say, if you're at a job making $100,000 a year and you like your job and you're in a decent cost of living area, well, what's the point of leaving that? There's a lot of uncertainty with travel. But if you're a new grad that's looking at a prospect of making $65,000 a year and you can make double that traveling, then yeah, it makes a lot more sense. So everyone's situation is different. We're always going to be honest, and travel's not for everyone.
But at the same time, we also get people who are like, I make the top of my salary bracket in my career right now, but at the same time, I want to change. And maybe if they're in a really good position to negotiate, maybe they'll still be making the same or better when they go into travel therapy. You just may have to be a little more flexible in where you go, because you can't always get your preferred setting, location, and top pay. But a lot of times you can if you have like a really good resume and you're really competitive for the job. So it's definitely good for a lot of people, just depending on what your goals are.
Yep. So we're going to go through some comments. If you guys have any comments or questions, feel free to leave those. We'll get to those. We'll start at the bottom. If you got any value from this video, please like the video. Leave us a comment, heart. We always really appreciate that. It helps us, and it helps more people see these videos.
Absolutely. So we got a couple recommendations for our trip coming up. A couple people recommended Colombia. with an O, not a U, in South America. We definitely have Colombia on our list, and we're hoping to make it there. We're just kind of keeping our eye out for what's happening with the COVID situation, the restrictions and things, but that's definitely one of the places we're hoping to go.
Yeah, ideally we want to go from Mexico to Guatemala to Costa Rica. We have another trip back to Mexico, and then if everything goes according to plan, probably Peru and Colombia. So that's kind of our rough outline, but we're not going to really hold ourselves to that if things change.
Yeah. Nick said, don't you mean you guys are 21 and 23? I wish, Nick.
I wish.
I was just talking to an undergrad or a recent graduate from the bachelor's program, and I was looking at applying to PT school, and I was like, man, how has that been like 10 years ago for us? Like, it doesn't feel that long.
We went and did a school presentation this past week at my PT school, and seeing the kids now, I shouldn't say kids, seeing the people now that are in PT school, it just seems so weird because it seems like it wasn't that long ago, but also they're way younger than us, so it kind of makes you feel old.
Yeah. Hey Cheryl, be sure you have a place confirmed if you're traveling to Florida. Lodging is limited right now, and what is available is very costly. May or June will have better availability.
Yeah, this is like the high season for Florida, Arizona, those kind of places where people are trying to escape the cold weather, and housing is definitely expensive, but it's probably even more expensive this year.
Yeah, it's going to be harder when you go to those snowbird type locations. It's definitely a dream contract to get down there during the winter, but you're having to compete with all the people who move from the north that kind of live the snowbird. You know, they live one place in the winter and one place in the summer, so you're competing for housing with all of them.
Nick says his contract is by far the highest paying he's ever gotten. He went perm for a little while, and he's really appreciating the high travel pay again.
Hey Jesse. Jesse says, in my first contract, I lived with family and I was fortunate to not to have to pay rent, but I commuted an hour each way. This one I'm staying with one person and it's $800 for my half of the rent. But this is an expensive area for one person.
Yeah, that's really not bad at all. There's all kinds of creative ways to reduce your costs, and it all just depends on how flexible you are, because some people are extremely flexible and they'll take the room in the house or these creative type situations, and other people just don't want to do that. So it's one of those things where you have to know yourself as an individual, and are you going to be flexible? And if you're not, just understand that your costs are going to be a little higher.
Yeah, and if you find yourself in a situation like Jesse was, where you have the opportunity to live somewhere for free, definitely we recommend consulting travel tax if you're going to still accept the tax-free stipends, because you may or may not still be meeting the proper tax home rules if you're not paying rent. Even if a family member's like, no, stay with me for free, make sure that you're meeting all the appropriate rules if you are accepting those tax-free stipends.
Yep. Nick says he's paying $1,200 for a room, but it's in a great area and the hosts are awesome. Where did you find that? Is that on Airbnb or Furnish Finder?
Lorena says, I would love to go back to travel, but it's one of the reasons why I haven't yet. I'm planning to purchase a small RV eventually, so I don't have to worry so much about finding an affordable place to stay. All I have to do is look for an RV park.
Yeah. If I was a single traveler, I always say this, I would definitely travel in an RV, a small RV that you can pull with like an SUV. So you don't need the big diesel truck. You don't need a lot of space. And finding campground housing is much easier. So I would definitely do it that way. Even if for us, like if we went back to traveling, we probably would have gotten a smaller RV that
traveling
we could pull.
full time.
Yeah, traveling full time. We get a smaller RV that we could live in, because housing is kind of hard to find right now.
But with that said, we always mention to people that RVing comes with its own set of headaches, different than finding short-term housing. So they all have their pros and cons, but for some people, RVing might make the process simpler and cheaper.
All right.
Jesse says, traveling in Vero Beach, Florida. I was previously in Port Charlotte. And she also says, longtime follower. I remember the 5-month trip you guys had planned.
Yeah, man, we're still a little salty about that trip. That took so long to plan, and having to cancel all of it, and then having to think about trying to get back to those places or rebook those places is kind of a hassle.
It was an experience, that's for sure. But thanks for following, Jesse. We appreciate it. Cheryl says she's traveling. She was previously in Venice, Florida, and now transferring to Sarasota next week. I hope that goes well, Cheryl.
Nice.
Zamina said recommend Colombia. Thank you. Millie says new grad on first contract. That's awesome. Thomas, I'm starting my first traveling contract February 14th. I'm leaving my perm job after 3.5 years. That's awesome, Thomas.
Yeah.
I hope that goes well.
Yeah, hopefully it's a good first contract.
Alexa says 6 years, CODA, now a new grad OTR, looking to travel by the spring. That's awesome, Alexis.
Yeah.
Your background should really help with finding positions.
And a very good time to start right now.
Hi, PTA here. Kaisa, currently traveling in my first contract. That's great. Congratulations. Hey, Becky, PT here, currently in my first travel contract. Becky is in our course group. Hope that's going really well, Becky.
All right.
Diana, travel SLP here, or looking to travel this fall. Awesome, Diana. All right, let's see if we have any more questions before we wrap up, guys. All righty. Michael says, thinking about starting travel PT around March or April. When should I start looking for a recruiter?
Probably about now.
Yeah. Michael, we typically recommend that you start talking to recruiters about 2 to 3 months before you start traveling, because it allows you the opportunity to get to know a few. It's a good idea to talk to 3 or 4. Narrow it down to 2 or 3 that you want to proceed with your job search. So after you have those initial phone calls, they'll have you set up a profile, which will involve like getting your resume, your references, what they call a skills checklist. So once you have that profile in place, they can actually start submitting you for positions about 4 to 6 weeks out from your anticipated start date. And we've actually heard, with the job market being the way it is right now, that some facilities are actually accepting applicants even earlier than they used to. So you may, if you go ahead and get the ball rolling with recruiters now, may have an opportunity to go ahead and submit for some of those jobs in March or April. So Michael, if you are interested in getting in touch with any of the recruiters that we recommend, on our website at traveltherapymentor.com, you can just search at the top, it says recruiter recommendations. Or if you want to type recruiters in the comments on the video, I'll link to the recruiter recommendations form. And as I mentioned earlier, we always look at every single person's individual situation. I got an email back the other day. Somebody said, I really appreciate the personalization of this. You took my situation into account. Because I think some people think it's an automated message they get, but it's not.
It's always Whitney.
I answer every single one of them. I read every single form, and I handpick which recruiters to send you guys to.
Yep. Cheryl says, stay with family or rent if you can. Yeah, we agree. If there's any way that works for you, that's definitely the best way to do it. Nick said that his room in the house that he's staying at, he got it through an Airbnb.
And Jesse said, good clarification on the tax rules.
Alexa says, what's considered a tax home? We'll link to an article on that. We've got a couple videos and a couple articles on tax homes. It's a little bit complicated, but basically it's the place back home that is your permanent home, where you return to between assignments. Because as a traveler getting tax-free stipends, you can't just move from assignment to assignment, renting at each place. You need a place that you call home, where you store stuff, you get your mail, you go back to. You have to have that in order to get the tax-free stipends.
And it's an IRS rule. It has nothing to do with the travel companies or the facilities. So if anybody's watching this that is new to travel therapy, before you ever sign a travel therapy contract and let the recruiter give you tax-free stipends as part of your pay package, you have to research what a tax home is, and you have to make sure you're meeting those rules. Do not rely on your recruiter or your travel company to ensure that you're meeting those rules, because ultimately what it comes down to is if you get audited on your taxes by the IRS, you're going to be the one that's in trouble and has to pay back taxes if you're not following the proper rules. So we'll link to that article about tax homes.
Yep. Min says, I pay $700 a month for a bedroom in Arizona during my current contract. I essentially have the entire house with a pool. For my next contract, it's a rural setting in Iowa, and the hospital provides free housing. I also have a few rental units back home, currently renting out to travel nurses. You can be creative. That sounds like an awesome situation. $700 for a full house and a pool, that's hard to beat.
That's pretty sweet, man. You're definitely taking advantage of all those different avenues that we talked about. So you can definitely be creative, like Min said, in terms of getting your expenses and your income ratio in the right direction.
Yep. Millie asked about recruiters for finding contracts with housing included. It's not really up to your recruiter. Some contracts, especially in really rural areas, they'll just offer that as a perk to try to get travelers to that assignment. So all the recruiters will have those types of jobs. They're just not that common. Usually we see them in places like Alaska or very rural middle of the country where there's not a lot of housing options around. Mm-hmm. And these hospitals use a lot of travelers, and they end up just being, they know they'll be able to attract travelers better if they have a place that they can house them, so they don't have to find their own housing. And they'll just buy these rental units and give them to travelers for free as a perk. So they're out there, but they're not real common.
Yeah, we've seen them in places like Martha's Vineyard, which is an island, Hawaii, which is an island. Alaska's more remote, obviously. It's more like Iowa, more remote. So they're out there, just not as common. David
says, contract pricing is booming in Illinois. Happy to be back traveling after taking a perm position for a year and a half. Looking forward to these videos again. Yeah, it's a really good time. Did you take that job in Illinois that was like, I think there was like a $3,400 a week job that we saw. And I think they had several openings. So that job is insane. that would be awesome if you got that contract. That's not common, but yeah.
Yeah, but David, good to hear from you. Glad
Yeah.
to hear you're back in the travel game. Samina says, thank you. All right, well, I think that's all of our questions, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really hope that this information was helpful to you. As always, like we say, in our profession as therapists and in our role as travel therapy mentors, it depends. It always depends. So whether or not travel therapy is worth it financially is going to depend on your situation, those expenses back home, how cheap you can find housing where you're going, and how high of a contract you can find. But we absolutely definitely think it's still worth it. We think 2022 is going to be the best year yet to be a travel healthcare provider. So definitely hit us up if you guys need recommendations to get in touch with some recruiters. If you guys want more education and information about getting started with travel therapy, we'd be happy to help you.
Yeah, we're hoping to do some videos while we're traveling, but we'll have to see how Wi-Fi goes and things like that. We'll try to do one every 2 weeks or so on whatever pertinent topic, what we're getting a lot of questions on at the time. That's how we usually do these videos, is whatever we get the most questions on, that's what we try to make videos on. If you guys have any suggestions for videos, let us know. Also, I know Whitney probably mentioned this in the beginning, I wasn't paying attention, but our meetup, we already have, that's about 3/4 full already. We put that up yesterday. So if you're a PT that's going to be at CSM and you want to go to that meetup, go ahead and RSVP quickly, because that's going to be full probably tonight or tomorrow.
Yep, absolutely. All right, guys, well, we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Yep, thanks guys. Bye.